If you can crank out 5 quality pieces versus 1, you're gonna stand out.
Was this valuable so far, a conversation?
Absolutely. I learned about the software, the fact that I could get people to interview if I tell them I run a podcast. More great points about not using a script, but also kind of having bullet points to stay on track.
Hi, and welcome to this new episode of my podcast debut, where I interview people like Vic who are considering starting a podcast. And hopefully, it gives you the inspiration, the motivation, and the knowledge also to start your own podcast as you're watching this. Thank you for joining us. And Vic, I'd love to ask you first, this is your first podcast interview. How do you feel?
A little bit of nervous, but also very excited. The way we started this podcast really calmed my nerves down, my stresses. I think it made me very grateful, very appreciative that I even have this opportunity to be here and chat with you, do my first podcast, learn how to run a podcast, learn from you, and then eventually one day start my own podcast and interview cool people around the world and learn about their journey.
Amazing. Thank you, Vic. Thank you for that. So I'd love to hear what's your podcast idea.
My podcast idea is pretty simple, and kind of since we did a few emails back and forth. Originally, I was just gonna invite people that I find interesting and just get to know them, learn about them, where they're at on their journey, what they're doing, why they're doing it, and hopefully I end up helping someone learn something, help somebody heal themselves or make themselves better. But one of the things we talked about in our emails is, because every Saturday we do these meditations, yoga sessions, and cold plunges. Why don't we do these podcasts with people sitting in a cold plunge tub? It won't be a long one, but it will definitely be an entertaining, fun one.
Thank you, Vic.
That's my idea for now.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, thank you for sharing. And yeah, I'd love to ask you, when would you want to start?
Yesterday, as soon as possible. And I'm learning about the different technologies, even talking with you, I'll learn about the Riverside app and all the features that it has. Been looking into getting a camera, like which camera works best, what microphones to use for the best audio, learning about different lighting techniques, angles. Yeah, as soon as possible.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks, Vic. Yeah, it's always an interesting thing to set up. Like, okay, what's the online setup? What's the in-person setup also? And that's something we can talk about totally. And in general, when people start a podcast, they often think first about the equipment and the tech, which actually should come after the goals and knowing the direction. And then that's like a consequence of that. So, because what makes a good podcast is more the positioning and the content rather than just the quality of the production. That's like a cherry on the cake. So I'd love to ask you first, let's say, what would be your goals with the podcast?
To help others, really teach someone something that they didn't know about before. I've been on this health journey since COVID started, and just been picking up little bits and pieces that have improved my health, my life, my spiritual journey, like my financial journey significantly. And I noticed that all these little things that I do, it adds on, it creates this beautiful flower, and it puts me at a different level of different frequency, a different vibration. And it's especially been happening in the last few months. And you brought up a good point, worrying about what equipment to buy. I used to be the guy oh, I need to get everything perfect. And now it's been more I just go and do it, whatever. This refreshing brand, I've been running it for a month now. We already have a website done. We have our Instagram page. We have YouTube videos. They're not perfect. I know that there's always something I can improve. Like, oh, next time I can do this, this, and this better. But it's just like, I just get up and do it now. I need to make a business card. I go out and do it and I figure it out. But I think the goal of this podcast is to really just help others. That's what we do at It's Refreshing. We help people become better people, become healthier, quicker, faster, smarter. You know, that's my goal is just to help others. So I get the most out of that.
Amazing, awesome, and I love that it starts with helping others. I think that's like the primary goal that would come. And in general, also, I find that to make it sustainable is good that you give and you receive, right? It's like, okay, it helps people. And then there's something you receive in that. And it can be, for some people, it's just self-expression, for example. For other people, it's learnings. For other people, it's connecting. For some other people, they like to have a certain level of views or subscribers, and depending on your situation, for certain people it might be monetization also, so getting clients as a coach, for example, or this kind of thing. So would you also have goals of things you would receive from it?
Uh, monetization. If it comes, great. If it doesn't, I'll figure out other ways to make the finances to cover the expenses of the podcast. But really, and one thing you just said is, what you give, you get in return. And I've learned that whatever I give, I end up getting like 1,000 times more. So if I, like every Saturday after a plunge, I buy everyone a coffee. There's 20, 30 people, 20, 30 coffees, it adds up. Seeing the smiles on those people and seeing them connecting and talking, it's just like you can't like no money can buy that. Like one of the things I was able to accomplish was because these people were talking, and this one girl said, "Oh, I'm trying to find a job." I'm like, "Oh, I know who's looking to hire someone. Well, let me connect you two together." And voila, she's got a job now. So you see those people's faces just light up, and that's the best feeling ever to me. Like nothing can repeat that for me. It's just like seeing others people's excitement and knowing that like you helped accomplish that.
Amazing. Oh, that's so beautiful. And yeah, I love when you give, and like giving is the
Mm-hmm.
receiving. Just in giving, you're
Yeah,
receiving because you love to give, and that's
absolutely.
just beautiful. And I'd love to ask you, I mean, especially if you're like in the situation to do that, because I know some people I talk to, for example, if they don't monetize the podcast, it's going to be harder for them to prioritize doing it. So many people, they have a podcast, they never start, and that's what I'm trying to help avoid, let's say. But then also many people, they start a podcast, they're enthusiastic, and then life kicks in, something happens, or and they don't make money from it, they actually spend money on it, and so they spend time, money, and then all of a sudden it's not a priority anymore. So I think it depends on everyone's situation. um yeah, I'd love to know for you, like, what's your current, um of course, we're public, you can share as much as you want, but what's your current situation with like your job and your purpose?
Um, I recently just got a new job. Um, yeah, I literally just signed a contract for a new position Friday and quit my job today.
Well,
So it's again, and it is. I don't know what it is. It's like I said, it's this new frequency, new vibration. Um, that's just attracting all these things into my life, and money's like kind of almost like the last thing on my mind. Like yes, money is important, but I look at money as a tool. Um, and like you say like, oh, some people like if they're not making money off the podcast, they like drop it on the side. You don't need fancy equipment. You can record everything on your phone. You literally don't need anything. You just need to do it. And I find that if you stay consistent in whatever you choose to do in your life, eventually you'll succeed.
Mm.
Because a lot of people will quit very quickly because I think most of the time it's because they just don't want to do it, or they're lazy, or the excitement wears off. But if you do something for a long prolonged period of time, you'll become successful at it and you'll make money. I mean, you're kind of doing like a very niche business, like helping other podcasters start their podcast. And it sounds to me like that's wow. Like congratulations to you for accomplishing that. Like that's such an accomplishment, and it's such a niche thing. But you're still able to make money, help people, live in like the most beautiful place in the world, work on your own time, and do the things you like to do. Like who doesn't want to do that? I look
Mm.
at the end goal. I don't look at like instant return or instant gratification. Because I think like where I'm at today in life, it took a lot of years to get here. I never expected to be doing a podcast with you or if anyone, if you asked me 20 years ago. Or now I make bikinis for girls to wear, and people do plunges. I'm a developer. I'm in tech. Like people in my situation don't do any of these things. So I don't know. I went off topic.
No, but that's cool. That's like a great discussion also with the podcast. If I can share my experience, it's been such a joy, having my podcast for 7 years. So it's another podcast called The Light Leaders that I've had for 7 years, and at some point I even was renting a studio and having a big editing team and the 3 cameras and all this, which I would
Yeah.
like to return to. But it's
Yes.
true that looking back, and I've done over 230 episodes, I think, with it. And so I've definitely been consistent. But there's a few things that I feel if I implemented more sustainability in the finances of the podcast, I could have kept it growing a little bit more. Well, having to spend money on it made it a little bit less sustainable in a way that yes, you can keep doing it with an iPhone and you can have great conversation and that's perfect. But then if you want to have a big podcast, there might be things that help along the way, like yeah, having the studio and that costs money, or having VAs and people who are like an agency that makes awesome clips for Instagram. I was watching a Diary of a CEO. They have like 10 cameras, a whole team, and that's exciting too if you want to take it to the next level. So for me, I'm at a stage in my life where I'm like, for sure, podcasting as a passion project is amazing. Depending on people's situation, some people they have a lot of money and all they want is to increase their influence and give to the world and leave a legacy, and that's perfect. And for some people, I feel just in the design, making it sustainable is going to be quite a good decision early on. That's what I also.
Absolutely. Yes.
Mm. Yeah, I'd love to ask you. Let's imagine so let's manifest. You're launching your podcast in the coming weeks, days even, and 2 months from now, where are you at with it? What would be a success after 2 months?
What would be the success of a podcast?
What would
Really
be
just
a
having
successful 2 months? In 2 months, what would define success to you?
defining success to me, it would be having people come to the podcast and just chatting with me. Interesting, healthy people that are, I guess, on a similar journey as I am, whether it's, becoming healthier, stronger, more financially, people that want to improve themselves and help others. If I get people that want to interview and be on my podcast, I'll be very happy. Now everything else is just an added bonus. That's really all it is.
Thanks, brother. I mean, you could aim higher. I'm just gonna be. I'm not saying it's bad or something. It's cool to be happy with that, but the thing is, you realize when you start being a podcast host, people love to be interviewed. It's very easy to get people like good people to come on your podcast, and even people like you can typically have on your podcast people that you could consider quote unquote out of your league in everyday life, like people who would not say yes to, hey, let's have lunch together, whether
Yes.
it's big, it can be a status thing, like if they're, I don't know, a millionaire coach, for example, and they don't
Mhm.
just say yes to someone asking them, oh, do you want to share your knowledge with me for an hour of a lunch? But if you invite them for a podcast, they will be much more likely to say yes. It's actually quite easy to get people that are like more advanced than you early on a journey to talk about it, give advice. People love to do that. So you'll be surprised who you can reach out to. There's a limit to it. If tomorrow you go to Tony Robbins, said you want to be my first episode, you probably won't get an answer. But a general rule of thumb is, if we use the status metric that can be the followers on Instagram, for me I can easily go 10x. So on my profile, I have a little bit under 6,000 followers. I can easily get people with 60,000 followers, sometimes 100, to come on the show, do a collab, and that's usually what you can aim for.
Okay. RC, I'm already learning. If somebody doesn't want to have lunch with me, I just tell them I own a podcast. Hey, want to come on a podcast and
Yeah.
then have lunch?
Bro,
Okay.
that's what I was doing 7 years ago when I was on my spiritual awakening, and my meditation teacher, boom, do you want to do a podcast? That, I don't know, that influencer, do you want to do a podcast? And having so many great conversations, learning and networking also through that is really powerful.
Yeah, and I think, even if someone shuts you down, the term I've been hearing a lot recently from multiple people is divine timing. So maybe at the time it's not lined up to have a conversation with that person, or maybe that person is not even good for you. They have a facade, and you think that you like this person, but maybe they're not. And the universe will tell you if they're meant to talk with you, they will, and if they're not, they're not. And sometimes that might actually work out in your favor. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I love that.
but I didn't know about the 10x thing. That's cool. I'm taking notes too. I'm writing down on a little booklet.
Amazing. And that's my intention. That's valuable to you and to everyone watching this episode. And if you're watching right now and you're considering starting a podcast, or you want to start, you're in the process, come on the show, come and talk about it. You'll see as a guest firsthand how it works. And also, you step up already, like you're doing right now, Vic, and doing your first interview. So it's a lot of things leveraged and combined together. So check the link in the description, hit me up, and come on the show to talk about it. And Navik, I'd love to ask you, do you have any main challenges that you see ahead of you when it comes to starting your podcast?
Keeping everything running. Right now, I'm kind of. I have Chris who runs the Saturday meditations and breathing, the website, the business cards, the video. I run it all. I do have a designer that I work that does the design, but it's still like communicating with. So it's a lot of different pieces, and it's a lot of moving pieces trying to keep everything running. Being a project manager, managing a bunch of puppies, and they're all just running in different directions, and you're like, no, stay here, stay here. So I could see that being an issue, like starting a podcast and then, oh no, like, or something failed on a website, I need to go fix that, like take that fire out. But I find that the more people I talk with and interact with, I end up finding always the person that does exactly what I'm looking to do or fix. 100% of it, at least in my situation, 100% of the time, they're more than willing to help me. And they're like, sometimes they don't even charge me. I'm like, no, I'll pay you for your time. I understand your time. I'll pay you. They're like, no, like I really like being with you. I'm like, oh, okay, sure, thank you. Like I'll make sure I'll mention and let everyone out and know that you did this. Like you designed this, whatever.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Vic. And it's so beautiful that you have all these synchronicities. And I think when you're in trust, and that when you live life that way, there's a lot of magic happening. So I love to hear that. And thank you for sharing also with the potential challenge of the time. Actually, that's the other thing that comes in how sustainable your podcast is, right? So we talked about the financial side, that can be one, and of course time. If it takes too much time for people who have many other things to juggle, that can be an issue. Actually, that's why I think it's really important to have good processes, have the good tools, and do things efficiently. And thank you, AI, now that really helps us to minimize the time so much. So when you have good tools like Riverside, using AI properly, I use quite a bit ChatGPT to automate some tasks too, and good processes, which you've experienced coming here, right? From Calendly to a pre-interview form to this, and then the post-production. That's what makes it for me. Really having you on the podcast and then publishing it from invite to publication, it's less than 2 hours, and that's how I can do like 8 a week or something. And then if you learn to do that, that's how you can do every week at least one, maybe sometimes two, with just a few hours without being a full-time podcaster. So I think that's really good, important thing for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I like how you were saying like using AI and automating things. I know a lot of people are still uncomfortable with AI. Like I write my post, I use AI. People will say like, "Oh, it's computer generated." It is, but I'm still giving it prompts of what I want to talk and how I want it to write it and what jokes I want it to talk about. So it's like it isn't it, but it does make it a lot more efficient, and you can create a lot more content in a shorter amount of time. And if you're competing in others, you're gonna stand out. Where if you can crank out 5 quality pieces versus one, you're gonna stand out. You're gonna get a lot more attention. You're gonna reach more people, and it's all about being efficient. And that's the one thing I tell Chris. And Chris is just phenomenal to work with. We tell everyone at our Plunges meditations, what did you dislike today? What could we do better? And they're like, oh, maybe cut down the time, maybe move. Like our first plunge was at 6 a.m. Who wants to wake up at 6 a.m. on a Saturday? No, I don't. I sure don't. And you're trying to get other people to do the same thing? No, they don't want to do that. So let's move the time. Let's cut the meditation times down. Let's pay attention to our clientele and ask them, because they're they're your market. They're the ones who give you the feedback. So it's important to listen too and adjust and adapt. So I agree with you saying like automating things, using AI, anything that can help you focus on like bigger picture stuff and not having to like worry about the nitty gritty.
Yeah, I agree, and it's an interesting thing because there's a balance also, especially as you do a podcast and a YouTube channel where AI is going to be really good to automate some processes and help with the editing, the post production, creating the description on YouTube, all these very repetitive things that can really be automated. And at the same time, with more and more AI things, authenticity is more important than ever because people really crave those authentic, genuine connections. So that's why AI is doing a lot in the background for me. But at the same time, most of my videos, when I'm alone, it's me going unscripted, one take, because I want to give people the impression that we're together in a room. And similarly, this episode, I'm not using the Riverside function of removing filler words or removing the pauses, because then it creates that kind of robotic video where maybe a pause sometimes is what is needed in the podcast for people to feel that they're in a genuine conversation with you and I. So it's finding that balance and standing out with that authenticity also, while using AI to support on the parts that are easy to support with.
Yes, big believer in authenticity, and I think people can tell right away if someone's not being authentic or reading a script. I don't know if you saw like on our story, we do these interviews where people show up to the Plunge because we meet at this coffee called the Pour, and it's a nonprofit place ran by a church. Amazing people, great coffee too. But people show up and I'm just like, hey, I'm doing an interview. Why are you here? Like, why are you want to be here at 8 a.m. on a Saturday instead of sleeping in your cozy bed? And the answers people give are just so ridiculous sometimes. And like they don't even break face. Like this one guy, Zach, who runs microgreens, super smart, brilliant guy. I'm like, hey Zach, like why are you here today? He's like, oh, I love pain. Just with a straight face, I love pain.
You can't script that.
like, and like you just hear me just start laughing instantly on camera. Like that's the funniest thing. So,
Yeah,
but it wasn't scripted. It's like the guy just said it.
yeah. Actually, it's interesting. I actually did a little test a couple of days ago where I worked with ChatGPT to script my video, and then I would read it, and I would use another AI tool, which is eye contact, which is pretty impressive. So even though I was reading, then the AI changed the video and makes it look like I'm looking at the camera. It works really well. But then the tone was off. It's like you can't just read that thing, and even if I was trying to make it authentic, it's just different. So I just prefer to go there and talk like we're having a conversation right now, and it's actually easier for people to get the information, to connect, and to resonate with what we share. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think having a script helps to stay on topic. But just strictly reading, yes, I think you become less authentic, and then sometimes it's actually making a mistake when you're having an interview can work in your favor.
Mm.
Something funny could happen that would have never happened if you were.
Yeah, and I like what you share with the not scripting. So when I coach people, often many people like to do a mix of interviews and solo episodes. And when it comes to solo, it can be hard to speak just alone in front of a camera. So I still recommend bullet points. And like this, you have the overall structure, and for example you put in a bullet point, okay, I'm going to tell the story about when I woke up at 8 a.m. on a Saturday to go have a cold plunge. So like cold plunge story would be but then when you tell the story, you're not reading, you're actually telling the story, and finding that balance is usually the best way to go when you do solo episodes.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree. Keeps you on track.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks, Vic. I'd love to ask you, was this valuable so far, a conversation?
Absolutely. I learned about the software, the fact that I could get people to interview if I tell them I run a podcast. More likely, I learned that the amount of followers, like if I have a certain amount of followers, I could get 10 times more. Great points about not using a script, but also kind of having bullet points to stay on track. Also, another thing you mentioned, which I completely agree, is not having the best equipment, but focusing on the content and what you're going to discuss and the people you're going to be chatting with. But yeah, all great pointers. That for someone who's never done a podcast, who has zero experience, wouldn't even think about.
Amazing. Thanks, Vic. I'm happy that was so helpful. And you've learned so much. You're like such a good, let's say, student, right? Like you've remembered so much what we've talked about. So well done with that. And you also speak eloquently and confidently, and you have that really good energy. So I think you're going to do so well with the podcast, and I'm looking forward to watching it and potentially helping you creating it too. So yeah, it was been a really good conversation. I'd love to ask you, Vic, is there anything else you'd like to cover on our podcast today?
Yes, yes, and maybe you'll be the first person on our podcast, on my podcast, and we could talk about like you're the guy who got me started in the podcast thing because you're the first person I've ever spoke about doing podcasting. But I wanted to ask you before we started this interview. You said you're in Australia. You're working. I'm assuming it was like a corporate job or some type of job. And one day you just said, I'm done. I'm done doing this. I had like an awakening, an enlightenment. I don't know what you want to call it, but you had this thing happen. And why do you think it was podcasting. It wasn't like fitness or holistic healing or anything like meditations. Like, why was it podcasting?
Thank you, Vic. That's a great question. And well, actually, it was a combination of many things, many things. So I was growing startups in Australia about 8 years ago, and I got into meditation and yoga, and I started experimenting with psychedelics. And I was listening to a lot of podcasts, including Tim Ferriss' podcast, and reading books like Eckhart Tolle. And the combination of all of this um, created a certain evolution, but definitely listening to a lot of podcasts really gave me the education that I was missing at the time, spiritually, health wise, relationship wise, even business wise in a different way. And starting the podcast, then on top of me listening to podcasts, was a really good addition because it made me also more directly connect with those learnings by having the people on the show, connect with the people directly, because your environment really matters. And you know the saying, you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And then so there was a lot of growth in listening to the podcast, but also in doing it for sure. And it's been a lifelong adventure, and I think it is it I think it is a life's work piece for me, you know. And I still meditate. I'm still really into health and all these things. Like I still have all these interests, but the podcast feels more like the things I'm giving to the world and that I'll keep doing for my whole life.
Yeah, yeah, and I could see it, and I love seeing people do what they enjoy. It's like it almost like puts them at a different level, or like I've been saying, frequency. It's like you can't physically almost see it, or maybe, but you could sense it. Some sort of energy in there. I can't explain it. I don't know, but very cool, very cool. I had great pleasure chatting with you. And another question I want to ask, and I asked this question everyone, like during even interviews. What would you tell yourself like 5 years ago, like what you know now, what you wish you would have told yourself earlier?
Okay, so when
And it's,
exactly? Because if it's 5 years ago or 10 years ago, it's going to be quite different.
I guess when you're like kind of getting into the podcasting thing, like all the experience you have with podcasts now, what do you wish you have like told yourself? Or like people, will say when I ask them this question about work or whatever, they're like, don't be afraid to like ask people for help, or
Okay.
don't be afraid to raise your hand. Like it could be anything. There's no right or wrong answer to this question.
Okay. So I'll give you two answers to that, and relating more to the
Mm-hmm.
podcast and when I started. I
Yep.
would say from a higher perspective, it is just trust, and it's all perfect. And then from a more my human self right now, that's like also growing a brand and all this, it would actually be treat it as a business, also make it sustainable. Because even though everything's perfect, right, it's like life's journey, there's no destination, it's all about the process, like it's all perfect. But the reality is, I think if 7 years ago I thought of it like, okay, let's make it sustainable, let's treat it more as a business, understand my audience, I think I would have a much bigger audience, like a podcast machine that has a lot more views, has a lot more impact, makes a lot of money. And
Mm-hmm.
for me that helps, because I also want to funnel that into newest community projects and these things. So again, like it's all perfect, but actually from that like more grounded human business side, I'd be like, I would advise that. And that's why when we have that conversation, for sure, like I'm totally encouraging people doing what they're passionate about from that innocent place, because as you say, you give, you receive. But also life in the last few years has taught me that part of my human experience is to have discernment and to become someone who is just smart in how they set up things. And yes, of course, just trust and have that childlike play and keep that, but also being that yeah, in that discerning place and doing things well in that way. Does that answer?
Absolutely. That makes complete sense because one thing you mentioned, if you treat it as a business, it opens up new doors and gives you more opportunity to do things that you're really passionate about, like helping a community. And that's one of the things like big goals as part of It's Refreshing. Like, not right now we're just buying people coffee. Um, we're handing out our merchandise for free. We're not charging for it. Like, maybe someone doesn't even have it, like wants a new shirt. They can't afford it. Like, here's a new shirt, a new hoodie, whatever it is. But also like connecting people and just helping them and giving back to the community. That to me that's been like the most rewarding is just giving money away.
Yeah. And imagine, if you had like a million subscribers with your podcast, right? You'd have people in Bali being like, hey, can I do one? And then if it generates a lot,
Yeah.
like they'd fly you over to Bali to do events here. And
Yeah.
everything would be like also more fun and more exciting, even though everything is perfect now as it is. But yeah, that's the point.
Yeah. Yes.
Uh,
Even like interviewing someone and having a podcast, like me talking to you, like you said it's like morning in Bali and it's like evening time, like just that alone, I'm like, oh, I'm talking to someone who's like
yeah.
just waking up, or like that's very cool. Like I told
Yeah.
my friends like, oh, what'd you do last night? Oh, I spoke with this guy from Bali on a podcast. Like, what'd you do? Watch TV? This is cool.
That's cool, and I love that you're excited about it. Like that. Again, it's always that balance because with podcasting is like, of course, you can do the work of finding your niche, knowing your audience, knowing your intention, your strategies, and all this. But the most important is your frequency, and people will connect with that. So as long as you're really
Mhm.
excited, and that's
Yeah.
like the foundation, the pillar, and I can see that you have that. Yeah, thank you, Vic. I think we can close our episode for today. But it's been a real pleasure to talk with you, and I hope that was. Thank you for sharing. That it was really insightful for you, and I hope it was also for the viewer. And let us know, guys. Like, share in the comment of the YouTube video. Like, what did you learn from this? And or do you have any questions? I read all the comments. I reply to them also. Let us know. And again, if you want to come on the show, please let's have a conversation. And I'd love to help you. And also, if you want to help the channel, like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much, Vic. Is there anything else you want to share today?
No, that pleasure speaking with you. Great guy, great energy. I wish get the coolest people on your podcast, and I hope it grows. And I'll see you on my podcast.
Yeah, I'd love to be a guest. Let's talk about that. Much love, guys.